Okay, so in this lecture, I basically want to discuss very few interesting ideas about how to handle failures of disks, and also how to improve the efficiency performance of IO when we have the secondary storage. So we have seen so far our discussions have not focused on this aspect. We have used a single disk, and then we also notice that with a single disk sometimes the block access involves seek time, rotational delay and all that. So it might take something like 6 milliseconds to a few tens of milliseconds sometimes. So that's a substantial amount of time. And so one of the ideas that come up to us when we look at this situation is obviously, why don't we do some kind of a parallel data access? Okay, why don't we put lots of disks together, and then why don't we access them simultaneously? Because we can, if the bus is fast enough, and we may be able to read off and we can make a wide bus, and then we can read off several disks simultaneously and then gain speed of of access. So in this context, there is a very interesting term called RAID. It is called as redundant arrays of independent disks. Okay. Earlier, it used to be expanded as redundant arrays of inexpensive disks. Okay, whether it is inexpensive or not, no, we were going to treat these disks as independent, and then put an array, array of these disks, and then see how we can actually benefit from this thing. So we will. This is a RAID is a umbrella term. So it has a bunch of techniques, bunch of ideas using which we can improve performance as well as reliability of the storage. So we will briefly discuss the main ideas behind all this RAID in this lecture. Okay. So essentially, two main ideas are kind of employed in this situation. One is called data striping. That means distribute the data onto multiple disks. Okay. So one disk data is actually is stored onto multiple disks. We'll talk about exactly how we can do that. So the idea is, of course, is that if you read those disks parallelly, then you will get access to your data, faster access to data. And then since disks can fail, add some redundant information, redundant data, so that we can recover from the disk crashes. This is the second idea. So in fact, we will be taking help from error recovery codes in this context. So let's see how the details are. So let's first consider this idea called data striping. Right. Basically, we want to distribute data onto multiple disks. So you could do one thing, what is called bit level striping, which is a very lowest granularity you can think about. So take the ith bit of each byte and store it in the ith disk. Bit, we are talking about a bit of data. Okay, a ith bit of each disk block has 4096 or something like that bytes, and each byte has 8 bits. So we are talking about suppose there are 8 byte, we have 8 bits per byte, and so let's say we employ 8 disks parallelly. We employ 8 disks parallelly. So for each byte, we store the 0th bit in the 0th disk, first bit in the first disk, and so on. So we distribute all these bits across all the 8 disks. Now, of course, you can transfer data from the disk at only block by block. So, suppose you now issue a parallel block read for all these 8 disks. So, you will end up having 8 blocks of data. Actually, you can see that 8-fold increase in the data speed. You get the point? See, if you take a block of data and then take only the one bit of it, right? One bit goes to one disk. One bit goes to one disk. So you are operating 8. So 8 blocks will be covered in the first blocks of all these disks. So if you give a disk read, which is a parallel disk read, because each of these things are independent, you will end up getting 8 blocks of data. 8 blocks of data. So of course you have to assemble all the bytes. From each of them, you will get 1 bit from each disk, and then you keep on assembling all the bytes. So you will get 8-fold increase in the speed of it. The one, of course, downside of this whole thing is that if you have to read or write a block, then all the 8 disks are involved, because the data is striped across all the disks. So it involves uses of all the disks. As against this, there is another idea called block level striping. Instead of doing a very minute level bit level striping, of course, even slightly higher granularity is also possible. You can decide, okay, I will take every 4 bits of each byte and then take that as a unit and then stripe it across. A block level striping, what it does is to do this. The 8th block of the data is on the 8th disk. Ith disk. Ith block of the data is on the ith disk. So you have a bunch of disks. So let's say you have some n number of disks, then there are two things, two advantages we get out of this block level striping. First thing is you can actually handle n simultaneous block requests, because the data, if it is it is likely to be there on different disks, and so you can actually probably be able to handle some simultaneous number of disk reads, because all of them are independent. Okay, that's one thing. Then supposing you got a big data request, which is a multi-block kind of request, then you can do a parallel read, and then you can get n-fold increase in the transfer rate. Just like in bit level striping, you will also here also you will get n-fold increase in transfer rate. Okay. Now these are trying to use multiple disks and then do parallel reads, and then it is not very difficult to see that we will get higher speeds of reading data. But what if one of these disks fail? Then we have lost the whole data, right? Because somewhere some block of the file is on some disk and that disk failed, and so you can't get the complete file. So the reliability of this set of disks comes down. We'll see how do we model the reliability. The reliability is actually, there are more details to it, but let's say we will just take one parameter called mean time to failure. Mean time to failure. So this is, so if you have several disks, how often they fail, that's the kind of thing. Each individual disk will actually have a probability of failure which is a little high in when you start using the disk, and then actually usually they run for a long period, like 10 years or something like that, but towards the end then the probability of the failure actually increases again because of the wear and tear, and also the tiny dust particles coming into the disk and things like that. But normally you can take this, if the disk has been, after manufacturing, it has been tested so that there are no initial errors and things like that, it has enter the stable kind of regime, then you can imagine that it has a good time. Like I've just taken some figure like this. These are typical figures like 200,000 hours. So one way to imagine, one way to convert, use this number is to think of the probability of a failure of a disk, single disk in an hour is something like 1 over 240,000. Now if this particular disk is part of a 100 disk set, then each of these disks are independent and they can fail independently. And so the probability of the failure of any one of the disks of the 100 disks is 100 times more than this. Right? It's plus of these things. So that's about, so if you convert that into mean time to failure, then it's about like 3 months. And that's dangerous, right? You don't expect a failure to keep coming every 3 months. So that's a bad. So the more number of disks you use, the higher is the possibility of disk failures. So if you decide to use more number of disks for parallel access in order to improve performance, we should be worried about how to improve the reliability simultaneously. Okay. So let's see now how to improve the reliability of disks. One very simple idea is mirror the disk. For every data disk, you also maintain a copy of that. So every disk, the data of the entire disk is copied onto another disk. So each disk has a mirror disk, same data on both of them. So if a disk fails, use the mirror of the disk till the original is replaced. That's the policy we will use. Now you can see that even though there are many number of disks, if each of the disk is actually mirrored like this, then the even though the probability of failure of the disks is high, the probability of data loss actually will decrease. I will show you how exactly that happens. Let's look at these figures. Let's say we have a disk with mean time to failure of 240,000 hours, and it's mirrored with the same kind of disk. Okay. So the probability of a disk failure in a particular hour is 2 over this. Is 2 over this. Why is 2? Because there are 2 disks, the data disk and its mirror. So a probability of a single disk failure is 2 over this much. Let's say we have a time to repair or copying, procuring a new disk and then making a copy of the whole disk onto that thing as something like 24 hours. Now you can see that the actual data loss will occur to us when while we are still not ready with the disk copy, or while we are copying if the disk fails again. So that is the if the same disk fails, on which we now have a suppose there is a failure, we have been using the mirror. So the probability of the data loss is the probability of one disk failing and the mirror disk failing, right? So what is the probability of the mirror disk failing when we are copying is that it is, you can think of it as the 24 times 24 over this particular number, because it's a probability within 24 hours. So per hour is like that, and so it is like this. So the probability of data loss is actually this sequence of events happening like this. One of the disks fails, and then within the 24 hours the same another disk fails. So that is something like this. So you can put and then calculate, it will give you this number. So if you convert that into mean time to failure, it's very high. So okay. So one can actually improve the reliability of this entire system, and then the probability of data loss will be very less if you use mirroring. Mirroring is a very nice technique where we can improve the reliability greatly. But then the problem with mirroring is when there are 10 disks, you are also again having 10 other redundant disks. When the data disks are there, then redundant disks are equal number of redundancy. Also, you are kind of using 50% as redundancy. That's a very high amount of redundancy. If you have a mirror disk, reading is same as reading a single disk, or it can be even slightly better. You might actually read from any of the disks because the copies are there. So you may be actually be able to handle two simultaneous block accesses at a time because there are two copies of the file anyway. Writing can be done parallelly. So in both disks you can write. So it's not very worse. In fact, in practice you have to probably pause a little before you write onto the mirror copy. So it will be a little less performance wise. Okay, but the main issue here is the amount of redundant disks that you are using. So it gives you high reliability, but then 50% redundancy. Now what we will do here in this context, we use the good old parity function from digital logic, and then surprisingly we will get good performance. So we will see this. What is parity? So this is the idea. The idea is store additional information to recover data of the failed disk. So for this additional information, all that we will be doing actually is use parity, the good old parity function. So let's look at parity function. Parity bit is defined as 1 if the number of ones is odd, 0 otherwise. In a sequence of bits, if the number of ones is odd, then the parity bit is 1. If the number of ones is even, then the parity bit is 0. Okay. Now, so here is the some sequence of bits. You can see that it has 4 ones, and so the parity is 0. So if you now actually take the original bits and the parity bit together and then look at the number of ones in that, you can see that it will be always even. That's how it is defined, right? Parity. So here is another example. So you can see 1, 1. So there are 5 ones, and so the parity bit is 1, and so the overall number of ones will always be even. That's how the parity function works. So basically, we can now make use of this, and then create what is called a parity block. For a bunch of blocks, let's assume the block level data striping has occurred. That means blocks are stored across some 5 disks or something like that. Okay, in a modulo 5 function like that. Now, so some blocks are existing on these 5 disks. Now take the 6th disk. For each of these first blocks of all these 5 disks, construct a bit level parity. At the bit level, construct a parity. Consider the ith bits of all the blocks on all these disks, compute its parity and make that as the ith bit of the parity block. Parity block. Okay. So you consider, say, block 0 of all the disks. So in the block 0 of all the disks, take the ith bit and compute the parity. Take the parity bit and make that as the ith bit of the parity disk, parity block. Okay. So do you get the idea of how to construct parity blocks? So basically, one blocks are there. So you just focus on the corresponding bits on all the blocks, and then take the parity and then construct the bit for the parity block. So a sequence of bits across all the blocks, take a parity and then keep that as the corresponding bit in the parity block. Now the idea is, if any of these blocks is inaccessible because of the disk failure, the parity will tell us whether the missing block bit is either 0 or 1, because you can recompute that using the parity information, right. So that is the idea of parity blocks. So compute parity blocks like this, and then put all the parity blocks on a redundant disk called the parity disk. So you have a parity disk, data disks, parity disk. The parity disk is the redundant disk actually. So it has some redundant information, but if any of the data disks fails, one failure we can handle. If one disk crashes, then we can actually reconstruct. If the disk K fails, set the ith bit of the block J using the ith parity bit of the block J, and repeat this for all the blocks. It has 100 blocks, let us say. For all the 100 blocks, we have parity bits there. Parity blocks are there. Each parity block will have information about bits in the block, So set the ith bit of the block J using the ith parity bit of the block J. So you will be able to reconstruct one disk from all the other disks, information about the other disks. So this is a very great idea, right? Beautiful idea. So with, even though you have n data disks, with one extra disk, we get very good performance and reliability. The more important thing is reliability. If the disk fails, we are able to recover the data. We are able to recover the data using the parity disk. And performance, of course, comes because we have done the data striping. Performance comes because we have done the data striping. We have put the blocks on several disks. So we can, so if you have a large request, say, get me 50 consecutive blocks from the file, then I can get blocks from all the 5 disks simultaneously, and so I will get a 5-fold increase in my performance. Of course, you have to work. I am glossing over several details, exactly which block goes to what disk and all that you have to keep track of, and then read them appropriately. Okay, I am trying to give you some high level idea of how this whole thing works. Okay, is this idea clear of trying to construct? The important thing here is that we are calling it something like a parity block. A parity block is bit level parities for all the bits of a bunch of blocks. That's what is a parity block. The bunch of corresponding blocks, right? 0th block on disk 1, 0th block on disk 2, 0th block on disk 5. Consider them. For them, you construct a 0th parity block. In the parity block will basically have parity bits for each of the bits of that set of blocks. Okay. So, if any of those blocks becomes inaccessible because of disk crash, we can reconstruct that block, and if we can reconstruct one block, we can reconstruct any number of blocks using the same parity. Now, consider writing a block. Consider writing a block to such a disk system. If you write a block, depending on the striping policy, it will go to some disk. It will go to some disk, right? And then you have to, since you are updating the block on that disk, the parity information will change. So you have to update the parity also. So if you see, each of these blocks that you are writing is some kth block on some disk, right? So for all the kth block on all the disks, there is a parity block. So if you if you update the kth block, then you have to update the parity block. Without updating the parity block, then it will be, the parity information will not be correct if you don't update the parity, right? So the read is simple. You don't, nothing will change. Nothing will change. If you are writing or updating a block, obviously you are changing the bits in the block, and so the parity information changes. So you have to update the parity block. Okay. Now all the parity blocks are on the parity disk. So anybody changes anything in the blocks, in anywhere in the data blocks, they have to go change in the data in the parity block. So you can now see that the average number of writes on the parity block will be a factor of times the average number of writes on the data blocks, on the data disks, because there is only one parity disk. So anywhere you write in any of these 10 disks, you have to go and write on the parity disk. So the average number of writes on the parity disk will actually be very high, and if you are using a disk a lot than the other disks, then obviously the aging will occur, and so that might fail, and that is what we should not allow it to fail, because that's our redundant information, right? That is the parity disk. So here comes the interesting idea. Here comes another interesting idea called distributed parity. Why should we put all the parity blocks in one disk? If you put all the parity blocks in one disk, even though we get very good performance and protection against single disk crash, the parity disk usage increases and it in some sense ages faster. And so we consider an idea, why don't you distribute the parity information? Why should we keep it in one disk? So use each of these disks as a redundant disk for some part of the data. Use each of these disks as a redundant or parity disk for some part of the data. So that is the idea behind what is called distributed parity. So let me give you some more details here. Say, let us say we have disks D0, D1, D2, D5, some 6 identical disks are there. Let us say for discussion purpose, let us say we have 60 cylinders in each of those disks, 60 cylinders on each of those disks. 60 is actually a ridiculously small number and we have thousands of cylinders. Now, use each of these disks as a redundant disk for basically 1/6 of the data. How do you organize this 1/6? One can actually work out. Okay. So, say cylinder 0, cylinder 6, cylinder 12 of the disk 0 will have parity blocks for the same cylinders on the other disks. Okay. So, the other disk 0, if disk 0 is going to be parity, then there are these D1, D through D5, right? The other 5 disks are there. So, for the other 5 disks, you take these cylinders 0, 6 and 12 and so on. For those cylinders, each of those cylinders will have lots of blocks. The cylinders will have lots of blocks. Compute parity for all of those blocks. So, instead of computing parity for all the blocks, now we are only considering these cylinders only. For these cylinders alone, you put the parity blocks on the disk 0. Okay. So, roughly the disk 0 will have parity information for 1/6 of the cylinders. For 10 cylinders, it will have information. In a similar way, so you basically need, I have not I put an etc here. You can imagine. So 0, 1, 2, 3 up to 5, and then 6, 7, 8. So all the cylinders are being covered here, okay, of all the disks, D0, D1, and all that. Okay, you can also, they are being covered here also. So you can see that. So now cylinders 1, 7, 13 of D1 will have parity blocks for the cylinders 1, 7, 13 of all the other disks. Okay. So that way what we have done is to kind of distribute the parity information across all the disks. Instead of keeping it in only one parity disk, now we are distributing it. So as long as you keep track of for which of these cylinders, where are the parity blocks, as long as you keep track of that information, then you are good. Okay. If any disk fails, if a disk fails, say D1 fails, then you know, so it has lots of cylinders, right. So for cylinder 0, where are the parity blocks? You know, it's in so and so place. For cylinder something else, 6, etc., where are the parity blocks? You can find out. So like that, you will be able to reconstruct that particular disk. Again, a single disk failure can be handled. So I am not giving a formula for this, but I think you can kind of work it out as to which cylinder will contain parity for what cylinders. So the disk usage will be uniform because all the parity information is not in hold up in one particular disk, but it is kind of distributed, and so you are protected against the wear and tear of that parity disk. Okay, so these are the various bunch of ideas that are made use of in constructing what is called this RAID levels. RAID is redundant array of independent disk techniques. So there are what are in the industry, they are called, there are levels that they talk about, RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 2, RAID 3, 4, like that they talk about RAID levels. So the higher the level, the better is the performance as well as reliability. So I will briefly tell you what are the RAID levels, standard RAID levels. RAID 0 uses bit level striping, no parity data, no mirroring. So this is actually no nothing. It doesn't have any. But it just does bit level striping. So it gives you very good performance, but it's risky stuff. Risky stuff. RAID 1 uses mirror disks. RAID 1 uses mirror disks, no parity, no data striping. It just uses mirror disks. So if you can afford to have lots of storage, then RAID 1 gives good performance and good reliability also. RAID 2 uses bit level striping and redundancy using, instead of parity, they use Hamming codes. And this is actually not much in use currently. Then RAID 3 uses byte level striping. Instead of bits, it will stripe bytes. Okay. Okay. So it uses byte level striping, and there is a dedicated parity disk. Dedicated parity, that's in a single parity disk. This is also not in common use now. RAID 4, 5 and 6 use block level striping. RAID 4, 5, 6 use block level striping. So RAID 4 is block level striping with dedicated parity disk. RAID 5 is block level striping with distributed parity. So this is a good solution. RAID 6 is much better than RAID 5. What it does is again uses block level striping, double distributed parity. So it can actually they use what are called Reed-Solomon codes for this thing. So it can in fact take care of 2 disk crashes, almost simultaneous disk crashes. 2 disk crashes it can handle. It can tolerate 2 disk crashes. So RAID 6 is what is the highest one can go with these ideas put together. So I want to give you an idea of this is something which is very commonly used in industry, and so the moment you go to any enterprise, you start have to deal with this RAID architectures. So you have some idea about what RAID architectures are. Okay, so this is one thing, but nowadays actually storage is such a big affair that we have dedicated companies that offer storage. So you would have heard about storage area networks. Storage area networks. They are called SANs. So these are specialized computing systems providing large scale storage with their own dedicated hardware, software, everything, and it's shared across several servers, and it's connected through a dedicated high speed network to the server using special cables. So these are called fiber channels. So to give high speed access to the disk. So these are block level data stores. Block level data stores. Of course, internally they will use a large number of disks and an appropriate RAID architecture, and they offer what is called as SCSI interface to the servers. So I am not going into the details of SANs because this is really it's a lot of details in that. So there are protocols again, because it's networks, so obviously protocols will come into picture and things like that. So, but anyway, again, the abstraction is again block level. So, block level abstraction, block level access, all that is provided by this. Before SANs came into picture, even you know some kind of intermediate systems called network attached storages were tried. You know, so storage system lying on the same local area network as the server, but then the local area network bandwidth was not sufficient for handling the data transfers. So now you go for a dedicated network for storage purpose. That's what is storage area networks are all. Okay. So with these, let me, what time is it? Close this module. So in the next module, I'll be briefly discussing the various algorithms for implementing relational algebra operators. Ultimately on the files you store relations data, but then when SQL queries are submitted to the system, it has to be organized as a algebra expression, and then let's see the issues that come there, and then you have to, each of those operators will have options of as to how they should be executed, and so that's again a pretty complex scenario out there. So I will give you a brief intro to that subject in the next few lectures. Okay, thank you.